Before I begin, I would just like to say that I'm not insane. At least, I don't think I am. I've been to several therapists, and all of them say the same thing, that I imagined everything. Only, I know I didn't. It was all so real. I'm sure I'm not crazy. Although I know the old saying of people being crazy not knowing they're crazy, so maybe take what I say with a grain of salt. I'll try to retell the story of that day to the best of my ability, but it's been years and the memories are starting to grow dull. So please forgive me if I begin to ramble a bit and over-exaggerate some details. It all started on a sunny July afternoon. We were all on our way to our favorite place to visit as a family, Mullycock Creek. We used to go at least once or twice every summer, and this time we were going with our cousins, Jack and Hannah. They had never been there since they live about an hour away, but they were finally able to come down with us after weeks of planning. Mullycock Creek wasn't that special, to be honest. It was just a normal creek with sand and rocks around the sides that opened up into a small waterfall a little bit ahead that we were very careful to avoid. And yet, we loved going there. We usually spread out a nice blanket, ate some sandwiches that Mom had made at home, and go for a swim in the warm creek. That's actually what I liked most about the creek. It was almost always very warm, since the sunlight was always shining directly on it. The water was always either a light inviting green or a clear sparkling blue. It always depended on how exactly the sun shone on it, whether the light was obscured by the few trees surrounding the creek or not. The rocks in the creek were always covered in moss, so we did have to be careful not to slip on them and hit our heads. There were very rarely fish in the creek, but every now and then we would get lucky and see a salmon or two a few feet away, although it would always swim away if we got too close. But all of that aside, it was just a fun place to visit with me, my parents, and my brother Sam. However, it was a good half-hour away, so the drive there was normally a drag. So I brought my music player along with me to help fight the boredom. I turned the volume up to drown out my brother when he asked, "Are we there yet?" for the 100th time. After another 10 minutes of driving, I was beginning to grow impatient and started to wonder when we were going to be there myself. Since I wanted to play online games with my friend Isaac that day at 3, and I didn't want to be late. But finally, I glanced out the window and noticed that sign that always sparked excitement in me. The sign that read, "Welcome to Mullycock Picnic Grounds." I pulled off my headphones and regretted doing so as I heard my brother squeal in excitement as my parents started to park the car. I looked out the window and noticed that the water was a nice crystal blue that I couldn't wait to jump into. I also noticed my cousin's car in the parking lot a few spaces away from ours. I noticed Jack waving at me from the window with a grin on his face. It had been a while since I had seen him, and he had definitely grown a good few inches. I got out of the car before my brother could basically trample me attempting to get out. Soon, everyone was out of their cars, and we were walking on a short path leading to the creek. We all, me and Jack, were each carrying our own baskets full of swimwear and sunscreen. "So how have you been?" I asked, as I observed Sam catch up to Hannah later on the trail and start chatting with her. "Pretty good. How about you?" Jack asked as we reached the river. "Pretty good," I responded. After we had settled down a few yards away from the lake, my mom took out a large blanket and spread it across the sand. We all sat down on it, and my mom pulled out a picnic basket. "I'm so happy we're finally doing this. We should do this much more often," my Aunt Ruth said. My mom nodded in agreement and started talking with her as she pulled out sandwiches and started divvying them out among us. I was lying down on the blanket, eating my sandwich, and having a conversation with Jack, when I first noticed something off. We were talking about Fortnite or something like that, when I took a glance at the lake and noticed a duck on the lake with its head submerged in the water, trying to find food. There wasn't really anything odd about it. In fact, this was actually a pretty common sight to see at that time of day. So I dismissed it and turned back to Jack when I heard the sound of splashing in the lake. I turned back, wondering to see if anyone else was swimming, when I noticed that the duck was gone. I looked away for not even 2 seconds. It was just gone. And I realized that there was a large ripple that was originating from where the duck was moments before. I scanned the skies to see if it may have flown away, but I didn't see anything. I would have seen it due to the small amount of trees. But then I remembered learning that some ducks could swim underwater, and I began to wait to see if it would come back up. But it didn't. And I didn't notice any movement in the water to indicate that the duck was there. "Hey, are you listening to me?" Jack said, snapping his fingers and snapping me out of my thoughts. "Oh yeah, sorry, go on," I replied. I tried to put what had happened out of my mind, but for some reason, something about what I had felt seemed unnatural, wrong. I know I would have seen it or heard it if it flew away, and if it was just underwater, it would have definitely come back up by now, right? But I just chalked it up to having it quickly gone in the woods, or having gone underwater and swam to another part of the lake. Yeah, that had to be it. Finally, I finished my delicious peanut butter and honey sandwich, and then grabbed my swim trunks from the basket. I then ran to the porta potty a few yards away, and went to get changed. After I walked out with my clothes bunched in my fist, and walked back to the blanket, as Jack started walking to the porta potty with his swim stuff. The little ones were just finishing up their sandwiches, and Sam had honey smeared all over his face. I waited for Jack before heading into the water. Once he emerged, I motioned for him to follow me into the creek, as the little ones went to get changed as well. The water was warm, as always, and felt like silk against my skin. Jack splashed my back before I could get all the way in, and even though the water was warm, it still stung my back with a hint of cold, since I hadn't gotten used to it yet. He started laughing, and I smiled. "You are so dead," I said, using my hands to propel a small wave of water directly into his face. This caused him to fall back into the water and thrash around as I laughed hard. He came back upright, crouched on a large rock, with his body from the neck down submerged, as he was laughing too. I dove forward into the creek away from him, and felt the water cover my entire body as it reached my neck. I soon noticed Sam and Hannah at the foot of the creek, about to enter while our parents were still sitting on the blanket, still talking. I began to do what I normally did when we went there. I began to just go on my back and drift like a log as the sun washed over my exposed skin. It was then I realized I forgot to wear sunscreen before going in. A couple years back, I had been sunburned at the beach, and it had been agonizing. I definitely didn't want to go through that again, but it was too late to go back on the sand and put it on, as the sand sticks all over your body and it's uncomfortable as hell. So I decided to go to a more shaded part of the creek where some of the few trees loomed over it to prevent getting sunburned. I waited over there and motioned for Jack to follow me, and he said he would come over in just a minute. He was preoccupied with floating on his back in the water like a log. I entered the shaded area and immediately felt the water get slightly colder due to the shade, but it wasn't terrible. I felt it was a small price to pay to avoid getting sunburnt. I stayed there for a few minutes, enjoying the sound of the creek, the faint roaring of the waterfall up ahead, the splashes of my cousins and brother, the squawks of nearby birds. But after a while of listening, I noticed a new sound. A sound so faint that I couldn't tell if I was imagining it or not. It sounded like a deep guttural sound, almost like a hum, but it rose and fell almost like the sound of breathing. Just something wrong about it. Then I noticed that it was coming from under the water. I froze, my heart thumping in my ribs like inmates in a cell. The water around me seemed to grow colder. I started to move out of that shaded area to join my family in the other parts of the creek, when I felt it. A sensation that I can sometimes still feel if I think hard enough. The sensation of something wet, like an eel, brushing against my leg. But it was way too big to be a fish that would live in this creek. I felt like it was trying to tangle itself around my leg, ready to drag me underneath the murky water. This snapped me out of my trance, and I began to frantically thrash, kicking and screaming, trying desperately to escape the grip of whatever thing was trying to get a hold of me. And then, I felt the most intense, hot pain that I've ever felt in my life. It felt like someone had sliced a burning knife through my leg. The pain was so intense that I almost passed out and sank into the creek. I could hear the underwater breathing had grown faster and louder, almost as if in anticipation. I felt the tentacle attempt to wrap around my injured leg. Using the remaining strength I had, I used my good leg to frantically kick at the tentacle, powered by the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I saw the water around me turning a deep red with my own blood. I managed to kick the tentacle off and heard a deep moan beneath the water, as whatever this hellspawn was sank back beneath the murk. My parents had heard me screaming and were frantically calling my name as I began to tread towards the sand. The pain in my leg had grown 10 times worse, like someone was twisting a knife in until it burst out the other end of my calf. Once I reached the shore, I lay down on the sand and passed out. I woke up in the hospital a while later. I woke up to the sounds of fluorescent lights and the sight of my family looming over me with grave looks on their faces. Eventually, my eyes fluttered open fully and I could get a view of my surroundings. There was an IV on the side of me, and balloons tied to my hospital bed. I was in a hospital gown. I could feel heavy bandaging on my calf, where I'd been injured. As soon as I regained consciousness, I instantly remembered all of the events that took place back at the creek, and the pain in my leg began to burn, more dull, but still making me wince in pain. At seeing that I had awakened, and that I was fine, my family burst into smiles. "You're okay," my mother said. "What happened?" I didn't know. Before I could blurt out a word, my aunt chimed in. "We heard you screaming and saw you thrashing in the water. You came on the sand and passed out, and there's a huge chunk missing from your leg." I froze. I reached down, the movement racking me with pain, as I rolled up my hospital gown enough so I could see the thick bandages on my leg where I had been attacked, still having a small stain of blood seeping through. I began to unwrap it, but a nurse came over and told me that I probably shouldn't, so I refrained. I saw the wound later, though. It was horrendous. If I looked closely enough, I could see the faint white bone. There was a large semicircle of flesh just missing from my calf, as if something had bitten it. I'm sitting here now, recording this. I don't really know why. I've kept this story to myself for years. I'm in college now. I told everyone what happened, but of course they didn't believe me. The accepted excuse for my cut on my leg was that I had cut myself on a large rock submerged in the creek, or a stray fishing line or something. They did investigate the creek, but they didn't find anything, and I didn't expect them to. I had a suspicion that whatever I encountered on that day hadn't just been in the water, it had been underneath it, hiding in the mud and murk, waiting for easy prey. After a long time of people denying my story, I went along with their explanations. I've been through several rounds of therapy, but I still remember what happened vividly. If I close my eyes and think hard, I can still feel the slimy tentacle wrapped around my calf. I can still feel the burning pain of what I was sure was teeth biting into my leg. I never went back to the creek, obviously, and whenever someone brought it up, I would begin hyperventilating, immediately remembering what had happened. I really don't expect anyone to believe this, but I really don't care. I just want to let you all know that this happened, and I hope that you take this as a warning. Never, for any circumstance, go swimming in Mullycock Creek. Hey guys, it's me. I really hope you enjoyed listening to this story that I wrote and made, and I really hope that you found it enjoyable. This is my first time recording something like this, and my first time writing, so sorry if it's a little low quality, but I'm sure to get better. Please make sure to like and subscribe. It would really help me out a lot. Please stay tuned for other videos. I have tons of stories that I've written all by myself that I would really like to share with all of you. Anyways, thanks for listening. Have a great day. See you later. Bye.